Welcome to the Karmic Mirror podcast, brought to you by Fifth Line Studios. In this space, we unravel the profound wisdom tucked within the folds of the self-help world and present it to you in a way that resonates with the heart of the collective.
Our mission is to seamlessly bridge the gap between esoteric knowledge and practical tools for everyday life. Whether you're a seasoned seeker or just beginning your path, join us and uncover the magic within and around you. Tune in and let the journey begin. Welcome to the first official episode of the Karmic Mirror podcast. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Allie. We are so excited to have you all here. Thanks for joining in and listening to our first ever podcast. Today, we are going to be focusing on the topic of community. And, when we were thinking about the topic for our first podcast, we were walking around Michelle's neighborhood and throwing out a lot of different ideas of, what might be some of our first podcasts. And while Michelle was talking about a little bit the concept of vulnerability and friendship, we really both felt lit up and excited about having this topic be the first of our podcasts for a couple of reasons. I think one, first and foremost, we thought it would help our listeners get to know us just a little bit better as we weave in and out of the topics that we've prepared for today's session. And also, we just think community has played such a large role in our self-growth, healing, love, worth, realm of our lives, which is why we landed on this topic today. So what you can expect from today's session, we'll be talking a little bit about why community is so important, especially today. We will be diving into personal examples of how community has helped us on our journeys, which lends itself nicely to the why it's so important and how it's impacted really can change lives, in the world of self-growth and healing. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about tips and tricks and suggestions for how you might cultivate your own community. And we'll kind of share those through some of our journeys and lessons of how we've built our community. So Michelle, I think before we dive in, share, we talked a little bit about what is community.
Yeah, well, and also I think this was just such an organic starting point for us. Like you said, like the first episode, how do we really want to introduce ourselves and how we started our podcast and friendship, vulnerability, healthy, supportive relationships, and ultimately how you build out your community was kind of it was such a natural place to start. So we'll talk about, what is community, and the basic definition of community is
the Google definition, right?
Yeah. And I always think it's a really cool place to start because it's, it's defined as this feeling of fellowship with people, with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, goals. And, what's not in that basic definition is how, we really view community as a result of our friendship, as a result of just this conversation of vulnerability and being authentic is having a space, an environment where you feel safe to be your true self, to be honest, vulnerable, and most importantly, where you have the ability and the people around you where you feel seen, feel heard and valued. Anything else you would add to that definition?
No, I think what's interesting to think about community is that while I joke a little bit, like Google the definition of it, what you and I have talked so much about is that, of course, you can come up with your general definition of community, but that community can be interpreted or mean a lot of different things to different people. Yeah. And so I think I just want to highlight that piece as well. Yeah. We know what community is, but it can look a lot different to others. So if that definition of community doesn't resonate with you, certainly we'll talk about that a little bit throughout here, the nuances and individualism around community as well.
Yeah, well, that's a good place to kind of start or dig into. And I think it's important to kind of highlight, like, what did community look like for you? How was it modeled? Maybe in your upbringing?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we know from a young age what's modeled for us is often, our perception on the world and how we view things. And while I don't have a succinct definition, thinking about community for this podcast, a couple of things stood out for me. One is just the differentiation between like family as community or community, right? When I think about community, I think about those who live within close proximity to me. And, I think what was modeled, I didn't grow up around my family. I lived with just my immediate family, across the country, and family wasn't as accessible. So community was really what I observed in my surrounding. Talk to me a little bit. What shaped your perception of community growing up?
I think I resonate with the kind of living further away from our first kind of way that we consider community, right? Like family, right? I always lived, just my dad and I lived across the country from all of my family. And so community almost had to look very different from what I saw modeled for me through my friends and their kind of communities. So I found community in church, in kind of different groups I belonged to, whether that was, outside of, extracurricular sports or activities. And then also kind of working around the distance to build community. How do I feel supported, and how do I stay connected to the people who are so important to me, even though I don't get to see them every single day or even often at all? So that was kind of, that's kind of how I viewed community now, looking back, although at the time it just felt really isolated and lonely.
Was it highlighted for you? Was there an emphasis on community? Because there wasn't, for me, I understood community, but I don't think there was an emphasis on the importance of community. Maybe modeled, but
yeah. I think the biggest, most memorable, I have to say, it was in the church. Like growing up I grew up on a small island. I grew up going to church multiple times throughout the week. And so that was the clear kind of way that community was modeled, because it was many different families that showed up to uplift one another, to support people in need, or just support each other when you're going through major life changes. And those were so many of the examples that I saw. There's so much in there. I think about just, again, like reflecting through the lens of this episode of community and church being a big place where I felt that growing up, and where I can see it so clearly of, praying for people. That was such a big thing of, every Sunday, what do you need support with? What do you need people, seeing people every week raise their hand and ask for support or for prayers, I think is something that kind of stuck with me throughout my life as a big emphasis of what community might look like, regardless of whether it's a church experience, because that's not my environment now.
Well, and the thing about that is, as children, we don't get to choose our community, or we don't have as much of a say in community. If I might, I pulled up this definition that Brene Brown, or she speaks a lot about community and belonging, and community to me is belonging, is a sense of belonging. That's a crucial piece to that. And this quote from Brene Brown says, being part of something bigger, hence church. I think for me, sports was very sports. Parents of, people I played sports with felt very community to me, but being part of something bigger. But also, and I think that this is really the important part that resonates with me as an adult, is having the courage to stand alone, to belong to yourself above all else. And when I read that, community starts to look different, because I think that's the transition now for me, is community was almost what I fell into, what, was expected or what was a part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the shift has now been, oh, I see the benefit of community, but I get to choose that community because not all communities are beneficial or for your highest good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that's like the perfect lead into the, to talking about why is community so important, right? There's some clear cut examples of why on a physical level, on an emotional well-being, a mental well-being level, of why it's so important, why community is so important. And I think to your point, right, there's a sense of belonging and what that does for us. And so, we're not meant to do life alone. And to your point of being able to cultivate and create the type of communities that support you so that you can feel like you can stand alone, like to that quote, right? So that you can be, I think that's,
and I'm sure in future podcasts, we may be those people who have more stats and statistics to throw out there. I think for this, I mean, just going through COVID, I think people understand the importance of community. Anyone who lived through that understands the impact of loneliness, of not belonging, and community is kind of that solution to that, right?
Yeah. No, it's so true. I mean, especially, coming through the world of coaching, right? You hear so many, right? Like coaching is a space where someone can feel heard, and there's an unbiased, like, lack of judgment. You can say, like, speak your truth or share your innermost desires. And that's part of it, right? Cultivating community isn't necessarily, it may involve having people like a coach, a mentor, but also like selecting or really being clear about the friends in your life, the people in your life that you want, to be able to feel less lonely, right? Like, I think, we were just talking about recently how you may have a lot of people in your life, you may be in friendships or in partnership and still feel isolated and lonely. And like, speaking to statistics, right, we do know that, there are
negative consequences or repercussions or impact on our health.
Right?
Yeah. Our lives.
We absolutely. And
when we don't have that,
are lonelier than ever as a whole. I think whether or not you are, like you said, as a result of COVID, of whether or not you're working from home and your lifestyle has drastically changed from interacting with people just in your work environment to then now interacting through a screen, or whether, there's so many layers to it. And so, why is community so important? It's, yes, proven statistically, it is a huge major predictor of your health and your well-being, whether it's your mind, body, soul health and well-being. It kind of ticks all the boxes when you're able to cultivate that really, that community that kind of meets you where you're at. And
so some of the research, I think, if you were to just Google positive impact of having a healthy community, right, that obviously relates back to your relationships of, and that runs the gamut on the spectrum, but it really sets those relationships, and that community really sets the tone for your quality of health and happiness and well-being. And there are statistics that people who have support bounce back from challenges quicker. And, that can look a lot of different ways. So it helps us cope with grief in all types of ways. Community does boost self-esteem, help offset stressors. I'm wondering if, as I'm saying these benefits, what maybe specific examples come to your mind, how community has helped you either in those areas or supported you in those areas, or a different area that might have been impactful.
Yeah. And I think just you asking that, I think it's really helpful for anyone listening, right? I imagine that there's so many different examples that can come out as a result of just reflecting on that. Like, what is, just thinking about self-esteem and confidence, having people in my life who can cheer me, like be my cheerleader and help validate, I think about, when you're working on a creative project, or you have a goal, you're working towards something, and you know your innermost world, your desires, your dreams, they're not for you to share with everyone, right? Because we're not always ready to hear the feedback or the things or the projections or someone else's perspective. And when you're able to cultivate those friendships and build that community of people where you can go to them, where you can, feel the truth of their validation, or vice versa, the accountability, or the, holding you to your word. I think there's like layers to it that impact both the confidence level, the stress of having to do and figure things out alone, the coping with I am not necessarily grief, but I think the everyday aspects of imposter syndrome and of like feeling the fear and letting it paralyze you instead of helping propel you forward. And so thinking about the simplest ways of just a conversation where someone, where you feel super safe and you know that they're reflecting back to you from a really loving and honest place, and not a trying to fix you or whatever the thing may be.
Yeah. I listened to Mark Grove's podcast, and he was speaking with Natalie Miles, and he was talking about community in someone showing up and saying, I have this dream, I have this idea, and people he welcomes into his community. And of course, this is not verbatim, but the sentiment of it was he wants to surround himself with those people of like, oh, you have an idea, you have a dream, tell me more about that, as opposed to that community of people who might say, oh, have you thought about the algorithms for that? Or my friend tried to do that and it was really hard because they couldn't XYZ. Things as simple as that, right, can propel the trajectory of your creativity or your dreams or your goals in such a different area. I'm wondering, like, is there a specific example you could give of a time where you felt like your self-esteem was boosted, or how you got into community that, or a way in which you engaged with your community that benefited you, like a specific example that you might share?
I think there's so many. One of the things that we talked about recently, I'll bring up Benchen course, right? That's a really that was a really big catalyst in my opening up to community, because, and if you don't know what Benchen course is, look it up. It's a monthly Kundalini meditation and accountability group of other women. And, what that did was it allowed me to declare my little dream I was working on for the months that I'm in. Each month you're working on something, and I got to say it out loud to a group of people and share what I'm working on. And that layered in not only the accountability to then show up and do the thing that I said that I committed to, because I knew that I was sharing that space with other people who were also working towards their goals. So it was kind of like that unspoken, like, if I stop showing up for myself, then how does that impact someone else?
Yeah.
From a confidence or self-esteem perspective, it was like working towards something with some very clear boundaries of what that looked like, right? There's some kind of rules in Benchen: no complaining, no gossiping, no giving advice.
Which is like your community that you've chosen to be a part of, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And those are really important. So when I look at community outside of that, I'm still looking for the same things. People who aren't going to jump to give me advice, who aren't going to, allow me, or vice versa, to feed into the like negativity of complaining about just things that are out of our control. And so I think going into it, you're able to express what you're excited about, what you're working on, what your accomplishments are over the month, and have those people who were like, yes, girl, get it. You're doing it, right? The cheerleader.
Hype
that wasn't,
people.
your hype woman, and being able to get excited again. So it was like this this really positive feedback loop of of having that. And I think that was a really profound one, because it was like dipping my toe in being able to step into deeper friendships, which happened maybe not as a result of bench-in, but because I had done this kind of groundwork of being open and vulnerable and sharing the dream with other people, like saying it out loud.
Yeah.
And then when I got into friendships like ours, for example, I I approached it differently. I wasn't so guarded. I wasn't so afraid to just be open and vulnerable with other people.
Yeah, it was that shift, I think a big one for me, and we talk about this a lot, is so for those of you who don't know Michelle and I personally and know our story, we met when we were getting our life coach certifications. And I often joke that I got my life coach certification to find community.
Yeah.
Now, not to, because I have yet to dive into the one-on-one life coach realm while I have professionally been coaching for decades. I joke a little bit about that, but it feels so true. And a way in which I've seen community positively impact my life and reap the benefits of community is through the relationships I've cultivated in that space. Michelle and I, we joke, we send voice notes quite often to each other. And sometimes it's like, hey, enjoy that podcast from me, because there are moments where it's even just, hey, girlfriend, I got to move some energy. And having a community and safe space to say the things you're worried that you might get judged about, that there might be shame around, grief around. Yeah. But even just simply having that community to, hey, I don't need advice right now. I just need someone to listen, and I just need someone to fully support me in that community, right? We're not talking about being supportive in unhealthy ways, right? But I've seen just a huge shift in my attachment to shame, my attachment to just negative thoughts around the feelings that are going around my head, because I don't know if listeners can resonate, I am like that overactive brain, constantly thinking about 5 million different things at one time and going deep down the hole into like the shame, the grief, and the thought process around things. So to have community to say, here's how I'm feeling about myself, here's how I'm feeling about this situation, this other person, this instance that happened in my life, has been just so healing. To say the thing. Michelle and I always say, like, just say the thing.
Say the thing. Yeah, move the energy. And going back to the life coaching program, it's so true. Like I think that was what stood out so much about that program in general. Let's
give a shout out.
Yeah, to Lumia. And was the community aspect of it. It was so important. I mean, we built friendships, and that became more important than all of the other kind of technical things that were equally important. However, in terms of impact, the friendships, again, I think I learned to listen and also learn to allow myself to be heard, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To just to be able to then show up and say, what I'm looking for in my community is also now what I'm ready to receive and ready to give in return, which wasn't always the case. It took, going through that program and meeting, friends that were ready to go. We joke about how, most friendships start with small talk, and our friendship started with like childhood trauma.
What's your childhood trauma?
Yeah, let's go deep right away. And again, not to highlight Brene Brown again, but I think that was a big starting point of, our conversations and becoming friends from this program, was that, what does she say about, shame? It breeds in secrets. And I'm totally butchering that quote, but basically the gist is that, we hold so much shame when we can't express things and when we keep it inside. And so we were able to just cultivate a friendship, cultivate conversations intentionally, like really consciously creating space to say the things and trust that the people listening are going to hear you and see you and not judge, and you're going to be able to let loose of a little bit of that shame that you held from just keeping the things in secret. And so it was really cool to have that like backwards approach. I wouldn't even say backwards, but I think that like deep end approach to building a community of friends.
Yeah, and I think what it did for me is it opened up this framework of what community could look like. And we'll talk about, our suggestions and tips for maybe cultivating your own community. But when you're in those spaces and you feel so safe and you feel it, you can really reap the benefits, and you see the benefits of, the other thing I think about with the benefit of community and being around like-minded, right? Because that felt for me maybe once, when you get hired at a job, right? Of course you look for culture and you look for fit, but ultimately you're not really choosing that culture, right? To some degree, you impact it, but you're not choosing it. And I think that this was really one of the first times in my life I had chosen a community around like-minded people. And the domino effect from that was exposure to a ton of different healing modalities, right? I learned about human design. I dug more into astrology, manifesting, all of these things within the last 4 or 5 years that have definitely positively impacted my growth, my healing, my self-worth, have saved me from some really dark moments as well, being in this community, right? So it's not just only having physical like people in your community, if that's the best way to say it, but it's the rewards you reap from just being in community, and that can look very, very different, right? Any other ways that stick out specific of how you've benefited from community in general? I would love for you to, sorry, I ask you the question, and this might happen a lot. I ask the question, but really it's a loaded question. So let me pose it that way, because you were saying something really cool about the community in which you live in. And I know that's very biased because Michelle has moved into a community in an area of where I grew up. So it's feels very kismet, because we can also now connect on that. But I think we'd be remiss if you didn't talk about the pieces of your community in which you live now, because I think that's so beneficial to your world, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, I guess it also ties to the like-mindedness piece, because it almost bears like redefining almost like for yourself what like-minded community looks like, right? Because that's important to me, because of the physical environment that I live within and the community that I have in near where I live, is that we don't always have like-mindedness on many things, but what is, and I think about like our friendship too, right? Like, yeah, there's like the surface level things, but what felt really similar, or the synergy, was more on a deeper level of wanting to like see and hear and be, that person for one another, and receive that in return. And so it kind of, it's interesting because it went so deeper than just the typical things of like, oh, that's, like the same things, right? And I think that's become so much more apparent to me now, because I live in a very small community, in a small town. It's a village, actually, which is even smaller than a town. And so I interact in a lot of small communities within this village, right? I'm the president of the Rotary Club, which is a service organization. And if you've never heard of it, you wouldn't be too different from everyone else in the world, even though there's millions of Rotarians out there. It's generally, I'm hanging out with people on a regular basis who have grandchildren older than me, right? Like that's just not like, that's a clear, just an easy way to paint it, right? And so I'm around people from all different walks of life, and yet finding ways to build community and seeing, like you said, the benefits of it, the benefits of my expanded perspective, and the benefits of being able to hold nuance and see people and still really value and appreciate them for what makes them totally opposite and different, and maybe in a past version of myself might have really, really triggered me in ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so talk about growth and healing,
Yeah.
right? That that part, I don't know if that's what you meant, but that's what I was thinking of.
And I
when
think
you
like
started
tying it
mentioning
back to the benefit, if I can, not to speak
of
for you,
course.
but we've been friends since you moved here while we were
Literally.
friends. And
Yeah.
I think from the outside looking in, not only have I seen you benefit from just experiences you're getting,
Yeah.
and some of those include professionally and monetarily, right? Which
Mhm.
some might argue like that's networking, not community.
Yeah.
But like how people show up for each other in this community, and that taking a step back, right? I'm back in the area after decades of not being here.
Mhm.
And that's that interesting shift of how you might view community as a child to the growth and showing up here. And what I see happen for you within your community is exactly what I have always known to be about the community I grew up in as well, which is so beautiful. It's just people showing up, right? Like we were joking the other day, your husband, people bring eggs to the school, right? From their farms just to give. But there's people stopping by your house to help with things, right?
Mhm.
People really, regardless of like-mindedness or not in community, there's really a sense, at least in our communities, of I may not know you that well, but I'm going to show up for you and I'm going to help and support you. And that, of course, can look very different based on the nuances of what's going on in your life, but so beneficial and rewarding, I think. And I've seen that for you too in your world.
I think so too. Also, gosh, like talking about, I'm in a season of redefining things for myself as an adult, and as just, in the same way that we start to redefine what does community look like, right? People are every day redefining what family looks like. And I think, I lost my train of thought here, but I was thinking about, you talked about networking, right? And some may consider it networking, but also, we've talked about this a lot, this Aquarian age approach to community. And whereas in the past, perhaps networking felt very transactional in a business way, and it felt very much, or maybe perhaps we look at it as like trying to get ahead, or whatever that is to you. Everyone, may look at it differently. I think that the really cool thing about living here that I see every single day is that kind of collective consciousness of supporting one another, of trying to uplift one another. And that comes on on a traditional networking, um, path of like, you have a business, you're creating a thing. Well, here's what I'm doing. How can we collaborate? And how can I support what you're doing? And how can I, like promote what you're doing? And oftentimes without expecting anything in return, but just simply because it just happens naturally.
Because it's best for the collective. I think about, you'll now have a space to do your makeup tutorials and makeup lessons for people in a local salon, but not because you were knocking on salon doors saying, can I have a booth here? Right? It's beautiful. The owner saw a need in the community for what you have to offer and approached you with that, right? And like, what a cool, beautiful thing. Oh, can you explain the Aquarian age we talk about? I don't think all of our listeners might say, what does the Aquarian age have to do with community and what you're talking about?
Yeah.
In your words, Aquarian age.
Well, I think of it, I think, again, the first thing that comes up is just Aquarius in general, being super innovative and super forward thinking and always considering solutions for the collective. And so it's not only really.
And we just got into this like a couple of years ago, 2020, I believe we shifted from Capricorn to Aquarius age.
Yes. And so you start to see, and I see it so often in my day-to-day life, this shift from, everything is like, how do I get ahead? And how do I do this thing to like, how do we build up our community and understand that, have a little bit more of that collective consciousness, that
Mhm.
interconnectedness, that we are all, that more global thinking of how we approach um, what success looks like for
Yeah.
everyone. Do I want to be, thriving and doing incredibly well, and the people that I see on an everyday basis are not? How does that,
Well, it's
you
the
know?
energetics of
Yeah.
astrology, right? So for those of you newer to astrology or have no idea what we're
Hmm.
talking about, it's, now we're going to be in this Aquarian age, which shifts energetics too. I think you'll find more people having those mindsets of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's less about, that Capricorn energy of like strong foundation, individualisms, things that are sturdy, won't break, right? Shifts to what is less important for the individual and more important for the collective, and innovating, taking a look at our
Hmm.
foundations and saying, this doesn't necessarily serve our community as a whole, right? And
Yeah.
making those shifts. So thank you for bringing up the Aquarian age and community, because I think it's so relevant
Yeah.
as we move forward. And
It's
200 years we'll be here,
super.
right? Isn't that the
I think so. Don't quote me. I
Don't
don't
quote
know.
us on that. Go
But
Google
but
it.
no, but I mean, I think that's the point, right? Is that the shift to again, for collective forward thinking, and it's also right, it's this era of technology. We're connecting on such a global level in different ways than we ever were before. We're
Mhm.
talking about community on a podcast that you're going to maybe listen to on a walk, like there's just different layers to the way that we can connect because of the innovation, because of things that are moving at such a rapid pace in this day and age. And so it's kind of a nice marriage of the two, because as things start to feel more and more disconnected through technology, right, or maybe more of this like AI driven world, we're also seeing a shift in consciousness to be more focused on the whole. And
Mhm.
so yes, we can have both, I think, which is really um, yeah, we can have both with integrity and with intention and consciously, which is it's a interesting and very exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, for sure. I'm wondering if we could circle back to, I know in like our discussion for prepping for this podcast, that concept of, who are the 5 people you surround
Mm-hmm.
yourself with and
Mm-hmm.
how that relates to community. We talked a little bit about that. I think if that comes up a lot. You see it a lot. I've had people in my life who are, I just need 5 friends, the 5 people closest to me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think the mark was missed a little bit of like, all I need is 5 friends when it comes to community. It's not only all I need is 5 friends.
Yeah.
As I've evolved, I look more towards, yeah, but are those 5 people the community that is really for your highest good?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on the 5 people you surround yourself being the most important as it relates to community?
I think that we are in a time where we get to be really creative about how that looks, just like anything
Mm,
else. Like, yes, you may be, the 5 people you spend the majority of your life with may not give you the highest vibe, or vice versa, right?
yeah.
Maybe it's
Like we always
putting,
need, yeah, go burn that house down, right?
yeah,
Like we
yeah.
like hype women, and I
Um,
don't want to get it. We talk a lot about like supporting, boosting your
yeah.
self-esteem, because I think this brings up that concept of, yeah, it might not be for your highest good, those
Right,
5 people
right.
around.
So it's like, what do you do in those situations, right? You can't just pick up and move, right? We don't all have the flexibility to say like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this isn't working, let me go find, right? Like there's that's, so what does that even look like? And I think that's where things like boundaries, whether it's like an actual verbal boundary or it's one that is just totally personal for you to maintain, about who gets access to your time and energy. And so while you may not be able to totally alter these 5 people that you spend the most time around, which, I think there's some truth to that saying, right? Like you are kind of, this saying is really harsh, but right, like you're the average of the 5 people you
Yeah.
spend the most time around. And yet at the same time, you can see many examples where that totally does have some resonance, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so what do you do in those situations when you start to realize like, okay, like I'm not here like vibing at my highest frequency, or even close to what I want and feel in my bones feels right and aligned for me. And what am I going to do differently? And I think we have a lot of options, like talking about technology, right? Like you have options to filter who you follow and how much time you spend on on Instagram, on the things, right? And that feeds into like the 5 people, because if am following someone and they're constantly being fed into my feed, I'm going to be influenced by it, right? So like you get to have control, right? Like you get to decide where you put your energy, where you put your time and your accessibility to you. And it doesn't always have to come at the cost of like totally alienating or cutting people out. It's just like being aware of it. And so I think that's really important, or just being conscious of like, are there people who you know that you genuinely have a desire to spend more time with because you want to be around that energy. Like what do you do then? I think we have so much more say and so much more control over what that looks like, versus that kind of helpless feeling of like, well, these are the people in my life, these are the people I work with, this is it, I think we have a lot more, and also that takes awareness and conscious decisions, and then it takes doing the thing.
I think it's a good transition. Speaking of that, I think you've created such a beautiful segue into the piece of how we cultivate a community that's the right fit for ourselves. And right, don't let us sit here on our pedestals. I'm sure you're like, oh, great, you guys, so easy, nice for you guys. You found your community. You're so supported. And
I'm so happy for you.
You're so happy for you. Next podcast. I think the area that I'd love to highlight for listeners who might be in that space of, I don't enjoy my community, I'm not surrounded by people that are lifting me up or that feel really aligned with where I'm going, it makes sense. And, I know it's not an easy thing, especially if those 5 people are your family or you're dependent on them, or it's a partner who you share children with, or it's a parent, or it's a coworker. I want to acknowledge people in that space. And Michelle and I continue to be in those spaces, and we are in those spaces. But I think part of our tips now, or our suggestions for how you cultivate community so you can reap some of the benefits that Michelle and I have been talking about in this space. One, we really talked about calling it, like, what are you calling in? What do you even have a sense of what a community might look like for you? And I think that's where the personalization comes in, and the individualization comes in for what makes sense for you, kind of what I was talking about earlier. So, share what might be some tips of, like, how do you identify what you want your community to look like? How have you done that? Or how has that shown up for you?
Yeah. And I think, to your point, it's going to look so different for everyone. I think the first thought that pops up was, before we met, I was doing a lot of, I was like making the list, like, what do I want in community? I knew there was
so you were already like proactively aware of that? Okay. Not me. Like, hit me on the hat. Like, I had to see it to know that I needed a different community. But
yeah, I just had been in a place where I was really reflecting on the kind of friendships that I did have and what I loved about them, and also very apparent about what I was hoping for, what I wanted. And so before we met, like, I had, I knew on my list, I was like, I want more girlfriends. That was like one thing. And it sounds so crazy to say that, but it's true, because throughout my life, like, we've talked about this so much. I don't know. I've been fortunate to really reflect on the different types of friendships and relationships. And what I knew was, like, I wanted more girlfriends. I wanted like raw, vulnerable, authentic friendships that felt like you could bare your soul and feel really safe and comfortable. And I knew that I wanted that. I had no idea how that was going to happen. And I also, at that time, I didn't think I was like, I didn't know how to show up for that either. Right. So I was able to get so I was super like clear in that essence. I was like, I want more women in my life because I didn't have that. I want to have those type of friendships where you can go really deep and, um, it's like I think people can relate to this, right? Like think about when you're in a relationship with someone and you have a tiff and then you go to your family members and you talk about it, right? And then that paints how they see that person when everything's gravy and you come back and you're not fighting, right? Like
Yeah.
I think it was really important to have a space where I could just, again, like say the thing and vent, or maybe say the thing that maybe it wasn't even true, but it was how I felt in the moment. And I needed to move the energy and I needed a friend, like people in my life where I could do that and know that it wasn't going to impact the other areas of my life, the other relationships of my life. There wasn't going to be any judgment for me or for anything else. Right. And so just,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Yeah. So thinking about calling and community, that was something like I have such a distinct memory of just wanting to get clear, like, what do I want? And then not sure how it was going to happen.
Yeah. And I would say for those, I mean, if you have made it to this point in our podcast, either you love us very much and you're our friends and family, or this topic resonates with you. Yeah. And so I think just being interested, I think you're in a beautiful place. Yeah. And that's what I'm hearing from you is while you might not have labeled it that, you definitely got a little bit more interested in your community and your relationships to say, something is off kilter, or if in my dream world I could build a community,
right? You
were able to list, right? And this doesn't, listeners, this doesn't have to be like a 72-page list. Maybe you are that clear, but I think lately too, I've had conversations with people, like some people are just, they're not the people who want to leave their house all the time,
right?
And when we think about community, right, I don't know about you, but what it jumps to is like being out in your community. It's a very physical thing. And so I've had conversations with people lately who are like, I don't want to go out. I don't want to do the things. I'm kind of feeling for companionship and friendship, but I don't know that. And my response to them is exactly what you've been talking about, Michelle, is, I mean, we were friends for 2.5 years and like telling all of our deepest, darkest secrets and fears and shame. And we honestly voice note and FaceTime each other more than we actually see each other.
Right.
And so I would say that too, for those of you who like in person isn't your jam, write that down on your list. Like like remote community. There's nothing to be, and actually I love that because it gives you exposure to more options to be
well, honest. That was like exactly me. I was like, I know I want friends. I know I want women in my life. I need that. I needed that. And also at the same time, I was like, how do I do that without leaving my apartment? How, right? Like, and that was part of it and that's what's so funny, right? To come back to this is like, I was getting not incredibly clear, but I was clear about what I was missing and what I was desiring out of relationships, platonic relationships, right?
Yeah.
And I was getting really clear about it, and I wasn't so clear about how I was going to do it. And somehow, right, things aligned, and I was like, I'm going to become a life coach. And through that, I met other women who I could bare my soul to, and who I could be really vulnerable and talk about the things.
So just getting clear, and I think that's just getting inquisitive and calling in and just getting interested, I think would be our first. Because Michelle did that, and there wasn't a clear path of, I'm going to call in like-minded souls, so I'm going to research this life coach, and like that's where I'll find my kindred spirits. It kind of evolved from there. So I think just getting interested of what's really important to you in community.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's so important. And we talked a little bit about this week, was also, maybe it's not so much being clear, but just starting to get curious and starting to reflect show up. And also I think reflect on the ways that on your own value. I think that's so important. That ties into the clarity piece, but I'm not saying like you have to know all the things right now.
Yeah.
But I will say, like I said, just, using this example, how it was going to happen wasn't necessarily my my thing to figure out. Though what I was calling in and how I was going to show up in those relationships was what I did know, or what I was getting more and more clear about, and what I was allowing space for it to come through. And you know, the universe, source, did its thing.
Yeah.
And
I think getting really clear and just knowing yourself as well is, you know, when you were speaking, I had lost this train of thought, and then it came back to me as you were just talking. Is I was watching Tony Robbins. I mean, this is 5-6 years ago, his I'm Not Your Guru documentary.
Okay.
And there's just this one scene, and it might not be verbatim, but he said, you know, I don't do surface level. I don't do surface level.
Yes.
And I remember that resonating with me so clear. And it was like, oh, I'm a deep soul, and I want, and it's part of the reason. So in my mind, well, maybe I wasn't calling it in, I got very clear on myself, but then I started to notice how that came up in relationship. And so it's not surprising to me that I ended up, you're on the other end having these thoughts about, like, I want to go deep. I want like deep committed girlfriend relationships. And I'm here, like, it could just be little things that might spark your, oh, that's me. And chances are, if that's me, you can look for those types of traits in the community, because it will really serve you well.
Yeah, totally.
Then we were talking a little bit, our next tip, right? Like, not only getting interested and calling in community, but just showing up.
Yeah.
Showing up can build community. Talk to me, Michelle. We had talked about that a little bit. What are your thoughts on just showing up?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most one of the most important steps, because we can think about it, we can dream about it, and we can plan all we want, but until we actually step out and do the thing or show up for what we're asking for, you know, we relationships are, they should be mutual, right? They go.
I just want to like intertwine, because we keep saying relationships a little, but when we're saying relationships and friendship, we do mean community.
That's exactly.
It's not just building relationships; it's like building your community.
Yeah, and I think that's like conscious community. And again, like what does that look like for you, right? Community for me in that moment looked like deep friendships. Community today has many different faces for me, and some of it is a little bit surface level because it serves a different purpose in my life. But yeah, I think the showing up piece is so critical, right? Because we're going to get confronted with our own comfort level, with our, you know, saying, yeah, it's one thing to say like, oh yeah, I'm going to go make friends, or I'm going to go out and volunteer, or do this thing, or join this organization, join this group. And then, you know, if you're anything like me, you may get to, you know, right up to the last minute and really be unsure, like, would it be more comfortable for me to just stay home and like dive under the covers and and be behind my screen, or can I just, you know, show up and welcome, you know, what unknown possibilities, not try to control the outcome, and not let maybe my past experiences dictate how I show up differently now, right? Like, I think that's the piece, is like really, really, you know, I want something different in my community or in my relationships in general, or I, you know, and I'm asking for it, I'm getting clear about it, I'm knowing myself, and now I get to show up and meet those opportunities as they come.
So giving it maybe like real world examples, because we can talk about showing up, I think some areas that might be beneficial, hopefully, is, you know, if there's that area that sparks your interest, if there's something that you feel called to or lights you up, like, where are your opportunities to show up, right? If it's knitting, if it's mountain biking, if it's life coaching, if it's helping people, is there a group? Is there a community? I mean, it can be as simple as just engaging on someone's social media site, right? That could be enough. I think an example, right? Because it doesn't always have to be these big monumental commitments to build community. Because if we go back to our definition of community, it's a feeling of fellowship with others.
Yeah.
And that could be at your local bakery one time, right? Like ordering a cake and having commonality and really feeling home. I think the example that I've shared with you, Michelle, as of late, relocating back up to the Northeast and trying to like redefining I have a big wide community, but when you move, it's what does this new community look like? And something that I know is really important to me. So tying back to that, what lights you up, what's healthy for you, what's good for you.
Mm-hmm.
For me is being in nature, is being outdoors.
Yeah.
So, you know, I would sometimes begrudgingly make myself show up for a walk outside just to get outside for the day. And it's such a beautiful, cool story because, again, it doesn't have to be this big monumental thing. But one day I was walking, I was not having a very great day. And there was this woman who was super elated by these birds she was seeing, and she was reading about them. And she was so excited about seeing these birds that, you know, it was a pretty rough day. So I won't say like it changed the trajectory of my day. But for 3 minutes, I sure felt like an ease of that pain and that grief. And then 3 days later, when I made myself show up to go for another walk, here was this woman again, and we crossed paths and we remembered each other. And now that 3-minute interaction in my community from just showing up turned into a 10-minute conversation, which did make me feel more like, okay, I didn't choose to be here, but I'm starting to feel like I belong, and I'm, you know, that energy is shifting. And I think we can't underestimate, right? Like I just want for our listeners to understand that we talk, our examples is like, oh, great. Now you have this kindred friend that you've met, but it doesn't also have to be as committed or as serious as that. It can just be like showing up for one yoga class and something resonating with you.
Totally. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree. There's so many different ways that can look, and I love that example because it feels like so subtle, and yet what a shift. Mm-hmm. And so just like it goes back to that, you know, giving yourself permission to redefine what community may or may not look like for you. And also just acknowledging those everyday moments where you are showing up in community, and it may not feel like that deep soul bearing conversation, and yet it's equally not, you know, it's also very important to how you feel, how you go about the rest of your day, how you feel, that, like you said, that sense of belonging. When we were looking for a house, one of the things on my list was to live in a neighborhood where we walked down the street and made eye contact and said hello to people and smiled. Oh, and like that's so subtle, right? It's different, right?
Moving from the city, New York City.
Yeah. I mean, granted,
where Michelle lived before she moved.
Well, yeah, upstate. Before that, I would get in the elevator and turn around and close the door. And yet, my soul, what I really wanted was to just like go walk my dog and see people and smile and say like hello or wave. Mm-hmm. And that tiny, what seems really small and simple, totally had a ripple effect in the way that I feel going about my days and how I felt about where I lived. It's like was so profound, yet seems so silly, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're like, you're calling in a house. What do you want in your house? And I'm like, I want to see people on the sidewalk that make eye contact and smile. Yeah. And I want my home to feel really warm and welcoming so that I can invite people in, because that's not something I was able to do, you know, as much before. So I think it's just really being conscious of all of the different ways. And again, like I said, like having that permission for yourself, it can look different and it should look different. And I think the process of this, of reflecting on what it looked like in our upbringing to throughout our lives, has shown like maybe the ways that community was showing up for you, or vice versa, that we weren't able to see in the moment.
Yeah. My best friend and I, you know, we've shared an experience this year of grief. It's looked different, but a lot of grief this year. Mm-hmm. And one thing, you know, and I think this comes with age, and I think it's things that I really want to bestow upon those younger than me in life, because I think it's so beneficial, is, you know, this concept of whether like-minded or not, the community of people just showing up without expecting things in return.
Yeah, totally.
And that has been such a blessing for me this year, because I've also experienced the flip side in the last couple of years of community showing up, but having expectations of what is owed to you on the back end, right? And I remember so many times being there and in frustration. And, even in our grief, it is that cool thing in community where you're like, oh, those people are just showing up. And I know it's positively impacting my life. And here's, how. And so I've seen like the real benefits of how community shows up. I'm very biased up here. I think it is, it happens all over the country, but I do think that there's something really special about this niche here of being in community here, because I see it very prevalent. And it's the thing where I've moved away for 2 decades.
Yeah.
And it would be such a trigger when people wouldn't show up that way. And I come back and I'm surrounded by all of my chosen family and some biological family. And you're like, oh, I was so grateful to always have that community, and I can only appreciate it now. So I think part of this work that you and I are doing, I think, is to expand that. And so maybe people can appreciate that a little bit
100%.
Earlier in their lives, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's something super powerful about our words, our spoken words, about having the conversation and sharing it, right? It's the intention is to like expand that feeling, to not dictate how it happens for you, but to provide just like a real I don't know, a really beautiful buffet of options from our personal experiences.
Love a good buffet.
Right. Where you can see like there isn't just one way of doing things, and it may be what you knew for so long, as we've seen like throughout our conversation. It can shapeshift and it can look differently, and that's a really beautiful thing. It's that freedom to be able to create what feels right for you in any given moment, and then also the freedom to like go back and see just how different parts of your life, different seasons in your life, you needed different things, and what that looked like. I think that's so beautiful. So
it's almost like you look hard enough for something, you'll find it. So I think it's that other piece again, getting clear on your community. And this may not always be the easiest, but you might live in an area where you're like, there's not like-minded people. There's not. And I can promise you there are, right?
Yeah.
Call it in, look for it. You will find those people. I have found those people. I was living in areas where there wasn't a lot of like-mindedness, or so I thought.
Sure. Yeah.
But calling it in and like really finding that community. And then it's so cool when you can start to see like that exists, right? I think the other thing with creating and building community, and it does fall into that like show up, the thing that I found really beneficial is like when I get pings of you should just text that person, or you should like reach out to that person, or just send a card. Like just it doesn't have to be like a lot of effort and a lot. And that could be something you're calling into community as well, right? But we talked about the other day, like I'm bringing back, I'll call friends. I'm like, hey, I'm bringing back the 5-minute phone call, right? Because I did start to realize, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been 7 months since I've talked to like someone who I cherish almost the most in this world. But why was that? Oh, because I knew when I got on the phone, it was going to be a 2-hour conversation, because there's so much to catch up on. And it's those little tweaks that I think have really made me feel closer to community, is calling and just saying like, hey, I thought of you. I'm, and I do it to my dad. I do it, it's like, totally. This is a 5-minute conversation because I thought about you. And that just continues to build that community.
Yeah. I think that's really cool. It's like, the part about knowing yourself is super important. Like, I think that's so important to, like knowing yourself, knowing what works for you, what you need, and then acting on it. Because part of that, when you were talking about it, was like the pings, right? Like when you get the ping to want to reach out to someone or do the thing. And so often we overlook it because of the, everyday life. We're like, oh no, that's going to be a 2-hour conversation.
Mhm.
Right. And so, knowing,
Fear,
yeah, like,
joining the group, fear, they're going to make me do
yeah,
XYZ, or like,
right. So it's like just like looking at what does that look like so that you can follow through, so that you can deepen yourself in knowing, you're knowing yourself, so that you can follow through on those intuitive pings or hits or whatever and do the thing, because guarantee every time you follow it, it's only going to strengthen that inner knowing and that intuition.
yeah, even if it's
Um,
this ain't for me,
yes.
at least you've marked off like
Yeah.
those people, that thing is not the community you're calling in, right?
Yeah.
It can rule out.
That's exactly it. Sending the text or a card or a voice note. Oh my gosh, during COVID, I had a box of postcards from someone that I used to work with that he gave me as a gift. And the first thing that popped in my head was like, oh, I'm going to send out postcards.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's like, I can't guarantee how the other person's going to feel on the receiving end. But what I did know was that sending it, just like having the instant feeling, that intuitive ping of like, oh, I have a box of postcards. They're really beautiful. Someone would like this on their fridge. Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, not my business, but how connected I felt after just doing it was really profound, because I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I took the time, I took a moment to just like physically write something. I love snail mail. I'm such a, I grew up on, living on a totally different coast than my, how most of my family. So in the 90s. So writing letters was how we
Mm-hmm.
communicated, and, landline calls. But so something about that simple act of sending the card. I mean, I have friends who every year are so great about sending the Christmas cards,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, it's so regular to them, but it's so meaningful to be on
Yeah.
that list.
It's such little things. I mean, it's that, but it's, even if you think about it as strangers, it's, if you can afford paying for someone else's coffee, lends
Mm-hmm.
to community. And I promise you, like your energy and your vibes will benefit from that, holding the door open for someone. I mean, I've been standing in
Totally.
line with people who were at the same concert I was the night
Yeah.
before, right? I've been on planes where, it's been the father of a band, the lead singer of a band that I've
Yeah.
loved, and just continuing to build that community, right? So don't also underestimate how just like one interaction can
Yeah.
build to your community, right?
That's so true.
So just kind of to recap, in ways to cultivate your own community, I think to surmise it is getting interested, really understanding yourself and what type of
Mm-hmm.
community makes sense for you, and then show up. And we're not going to define what that looks like for you,
Right.
obviously, because it can look so different. Any other suggestions before we move on to our final segment?
No, I think those are really good points, right? I think that's like to keep it simple, because
Mhm.
it can be really simple, and to be aware of the subtleties of what that feels and looks like, and be open to the many different ways that community is going to show up and look in your life, um, is so powerful.
Yeah. So I think what we'd love to introduce you to on our first podcast is how we are hoping to close out all of our podcasts. And that is what we call the self-love check-in.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, the intent is to share a little bit about where we're out on our journey and how we continue to do the quote unquote work,
Yeah.
and really share with our listeners and our community of ways in which we are continuing to build our self love. And when I say self love, you can interchange that with self worth, self growth,
Mm-hmm.
those areas. But for today, where we're going to start is really connecting back to the community theme. And I'll throw this question at you first,
Mm-hmm.
Michelle, is, recently, how have you really leaned into self-love in regards to community?
Well, first, that this quote was rolling around in my head today, and it's like one of my favorite lifetime quotes of Ram Dass. He says, I can do nothing for you but work on myself, and you can do nothing for me but work on yourself. And I think in
I
the
love
context
that.
of community and self-love, they go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
Like how I love myself is how I'm able to love you, or by, you know, or be,
I just
or
got
receive,
chills.
right?
That's so beautiful. Yeah.
It's one of my favorite. I mean, Ram Dass just in general is an incredible human.
All the things.
And so I love that quote. I love that saying, and I really hold it close to me because that's how self-love has evolved for me is, you know, through compassion. And this week recently, you know, I think one of the biggest ways that looks, you know, just one of the biggest is through our voice notes of, you know, trusting that I can say the thing, that I can feel like the depth of my emotional low, which isn't so frequent. It's not, I'm like, I'm a pretty optimistic, hopeful, happy, that tends to be my baseline. Which isn't, you know, not to say that I'm always that way. However, I think what's shifted and as of late is that when I'm not at that space, when I am in this very, you know, what's the point kind of depths of my sadness and emotions, is loving myself through it enough to accept that I can say the thing that may not feel right or may feel whatever, but because I need to say it and I need to get it out of my body and out of my throat and just out in a safe space where it's not going to be held against me or even brought up, right? Like maybe I just need to say it into the ethers of, or into a voice note and know that you're hearing it on the other end, right? And I think that process allows space for me to have compassion for when I'm not at my highest and still be totally accepting of that I'm human, I'm complex, I have emotions, and I can be high frequency and all the things, and I can be petty and I can be angry and I can, you know, um, I have the capacity for all of that. And so I think the self-love piece comes in is when I do hit those moments, and having compassion, having love for myself and acceptance to know, like, yes, you're human. You're allowed to be, you know, I don't want to censor our podcast, so you're allowed to be a bee. I didn't want to get a.
I think we might have that issue anyways with me, you know.
Yeah, it's gonna kind of. You can totally. That's okay, and you get to still love yourself and know that you're still evolving, and you know, I'm not always going to be floating on cloud nine. That's not, while it may be a kind of a little bit of a norm sometimes, yeah, like I'm allowed to do the things that feel cringy and feel like, oh, I didn't like that about myself, but I still love myself. That
does it feel like what I'm picking up on? Does it feel like how that impacts your community is like yourself loving yourself to authenticity, which then is helping you show up in your community?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't want to throw an adjective in there for you because I don't want to name the thing, but you're just showing up more authentically in your community through self-love.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And less guarded.
Yeah.
Right? I guess it's authentic, but I think less guarded is clear, because less guarded, less censored, right? Because I had, you know, twofold. I have the community to be able to say the things in a safe space, so that I can then move past it, so that I don't have to spiral into these things that aren't really true, right? Like that's what happens with the negative spirals. It's like, is it true? Maybe not. You know, like can I really like defend this perspective right now? Probably not, but I am in my emotions and I get to say the thing safely, you know, like you said, like so that I can move past it, I can move through it. And I can then show up more clear-headed, more like in balance, less with a chip on my shoulder about whatever the thing is. And I think that's really, and like I said, like less of a guard up to feel the need to censor myself, because
so that you can really benefit from community.
Yeah,
right?
Totally. Yeah. And I can be honest and have those real friendships, and also part of that, I mean, we could talk about this all day, but like part of the benefits of having that ability is that I then get to hold space for the people in my life who maybe get to also show up as human and complex and in their cringe. And I get to hold that space without judging them, because I'm like, well, if I'm not judging myself, how dare I try to judge what you're doing, right? Like, that's not fair. We're doing the work. I can do nothing for you,
it's
but
like
work
this
on myself.
hidden value or this like domino effect
Yeah.
that, you know, I think a lot of society can tell us like give, give, give.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that like self-care, self-love is not selfish. And you have just so beautifully kind of articulated that full circle of why self-love and acceptance and authenticity is so important. Like right there, you hit the nail on the head, because while most people would say, hey, that's selfish, that's, you know, you're just thinking of yourself to do XYZ, what you're saying, how you show up, it actually is creating a larger container for you to hold space for others to be authentic, which is then all of that benefit of community. And I hope the listeners can follow us on our journey of that.
Yeah. All right. Well, you tell me, how are you leaning into self-love within your community?
Yeah, I think thinking about it, I think my answer yesterday or the day before might have been a little bit different, but I've, you know, really reflecting, knowing that we would lean into this question today. I think my self-love process the last couple of weeks has been really leaning into, one, being present with my emotions, and second, being honest about my emotions. I think while I'm so blessed to have this beautiful community, the reality of it is that currently I'm in a place in my life where there could be a lot of triggers within my community, right? Between the holidays and partnerships and parents and marriages. And I think just being loving to myself of saying like, hey, that triggers you about that friend or that person in the community, or being around large families is triggering. It makes you sad that you don't have that, or you're yearning for that, or it's hard. And then the self-love piece also, of course, within safe people in my community, is sharing those feelings. And, you know, I think that is self-love, but it's building my community and the benefits of my community, because it allows people to see you more clearly, to understand you more clearly. And again, you know, I won't pretend that I don't sometimes get immediate like reactions to people, like from people of like, well, you can't blame them for that, or you can't, you know, and again, that's kind of the nitpickiness of, maybe not nitpickiness isn't the best word to say it, but getting more clear on who you want to call in. And that's how I really discern, okay, this is my community for when I really need to be vulnerable and say the thing of like, hey, it's really hard for me to be around you and your family around the holidays because I yearn for a family of my own and I don't have any. And so I may step aside, and it doesn't have to do with you. You don't have to share guilt, or you don't have to feel bad that I feel sad, but I do need you to understand that space. So that's how I've really leaned into self-love, is being aware of that, understanding that it's okay to have those emotions, and it doesn't mean you're a rude person or a mean person to, if other people trigger you, but then continuing to be vulnerable about that to my community, because it has just really allowed me to see people embrace me more, and they show up in a way that supports me a little bit more. So that's how I would say I've leaned into self-love.
Yeah. The more it sounds like, you know, through both of our examples, it's like the more you learn how to love yourself, RuPaul, you know, the more, and the more you create that safe space for yourself to to feel that, to receive, you teach other people to how to do it for themselves, right? Like you said, it's this ripple effect. They learn how to love you. They learn how to love themselves in their own unique way, because there's like this example of this is, it's safe. It's okay to do this. It's okay to be honest. And yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that.
And I think I've seen a big shift, because I think, if I'm being honest and vulnerable, like maybe a decade ago, and maybe it's been more recent, but I think that being in those spaces and community, maybe it might have shown up more as like subconscious resentment or bitterness, or like not really being able to fully show up with genuine excitement, or, where there's envy involved, right?
Totally.
Because there's some envy in that. But I think the self-love of naming the thing, communicating the thing, has really shifted energy that wholeheartedly, I feel like genuine happiness and excitement for others at their space in life, where 10 years ago, I think I would have avoided more of those situations because of the triggers they would give for me. And what that does is cuts me off from community and those who support and love me most.
I love that. There's so much in there. And for the sake of time, we'll save it for another episode. I feel like just the self-love check-in could expand itself. I hope that it does.
Well, I really hope that this episode resonated with our listeners. And I hope that, even one little tidbit might change the trajectory of how you view community and calling it in, and the benefits to that. We'd love for you to join our community, however that looks, and to whatever extent. There's a seat at the table for all who feel called to join our community.
Absolutely. Well, that's all for us for today. And until our next episode,
be well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. If you resonated with what you heard today, join us in this vibrant community of seekers, dreamers, and creators. Find us on Instagram at Karmic Mirror Podcast, and stay connected with us for additional content, updates, and more. We love hearing from our community and engaging in conversations.
You can catch all our episodes anywhere you listen to podcasts, and make sure to subscribe. And if you really love what you're hearing, we'd be so grateful if you would leave us a 5-star review or share with someone who might benefit from our content. Your feedback means the world to us.
As we bid you farewell, we encourage you to embrace the ever-unfolding story of your life. Life's too short for a one-size-fits-all approach. Remember, your path to flourishing is uniquely yours.
Until next time on the Karmic Mirror, stay true, stay curious, and always be kind to yourself.